Listen, I'm going to be direct with you. If you think Trump is going to save the United States, you probably haven't understood what's really happening. The truth is much more complex, much more nuanced, and frankly, much more disturbing than these simplistic narratives from both camps. What Trump represents in 2025 is not an aberration of the American system, it's the brutal revelation of what this system has become. And what we're observing right now is not destruction. It's a radical transformation whose consequences nobody really controls. So sit back comfortably, because what I'm about to expose goes beyond the usual talking points from CNN or Fox News. Let's start by dismantling this romantic idea that Trump is a unique phenomenon that emerges from nowhere to disrupt the established order. That's false. Trump is the symptom, not the disease. The disease is 40 years of systematic destruction of the American middle class, massive deindustrialization, financialization of the economy, and a bipartisan elite that enriched itself while entire cities in the Midwest died slowly. When the factories of Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh closed their doors in the 80s and 90s, where were the Republican and Democratic elites? They were celebrating globalization, signing free trade agreements that benefited Wall Street shareholders, and condescendingly explaining to laid-off workers that they needed to learn to code. The resentment that Trump exploited in 2016 and continues to mobilize today didn't come from nowhere. It's the direct product of decades of betrayal of the American dream's promises by a disconnected political class. The real question, therefore, isn't why Trump, but why did it take so long? And the answer to that question should terrify any lucid observer of American democracy, because it reveals a fracture so deep in the American social contract that no election, no president can repair it alone. Trump didn't create this fracture. He simply built his political empire on its ruins. Now let's look at what's really happening under his second term. The tariffs he's imposing aren't just a questionable economic policy, it's a complete overhaul of the global economic order established since 1945. When Trump announces 25% tariffs on Chinese, Mexican, Canadian imports, this isn't a simple trade negotiation. It's the declaration of a multi-front economic war whose consequences will reverberate for generations. Traditional economists will tell you that these tariffs will increase prices for American consumers, reduce growth, provoke retaliation. They're right in the short term, but they're missing the real strategic issue. Trump is testing whether America can reindustrialize its economy through the brute force of tariff protection, even if it means a decade of economic pain for consumers. It's a massive, reckless, and potentially catastrophic bet, but it's also the bet that China, India, and increasingly more nations are making as they look at neoliberal globalization and conclude it has reached its limits. The difference is that Trump is doing it without a coherent plan, without a coordinated industrial strategy, and with an unpredictability that terrifies markets and allies. Look at what's happening with NATO. Trump doesn't criticize NATO because he's a Russian agent. As some like to fantasize, he criticizes it because he sees an alliance where the United States pays 70% of the bill to defend European countries that spend 1.5% of their GDP on defense, while America spends 3.5%. From his transactional point of view, it's a monumental scam. And you know what? Millions of Americans agree with him. When you tell a Michigan worker that the United States must spend hundreds of billions to defend Estonia while the schools in his neighborhood are falling apart, don't be surprised if he finds Trump's argument convincing. The problem isn't that he's completely wrong. The problem is that he reduces a complex architecture of collective security that has maintained peace in Europe for 80 years to a simple accounting calculation. And in this process, he weakens alliances that are the foundation of American global power, not through ideology, but through simple misunderstanding of how geopolitical power really works in the 21st century. Now let's talk about what really worries American democratic institutions, and here we enter territory where Trump's critics are absolutely right to be alarmed. The erosion of federal justice independence is not a conspiracy theory, it's a documented reality. When Trump appoints federal judges who are selected not for their legal excellence but for their ideological and personal loyalty, when he publicly attacks judges who rule against him, when he suggests that the Department of Justice should prosecute his political opponents, we're no longer in the realm of normal politics. We're in the realm of what political scientists call democratic backsliding. And this backsliding isn't theoretical. Look at what's happening with the press. Trump has spent 8 years describing the media as the enemy of the people, rhetoric directly borrowed from authoritarian regimes. The cumulative effect of this rhetoric isn't just to discredit CNN or the New York Times with his base, it's to completely destroy the very idea that there can be a verifiable factual truth independent of partisan allegiances. When 40% of America believes that any negative information about Trump is automatically fake news, and 40% believes that any positive information is propaganda, you no longer have a functioning democracy, you have two parallel realities incapable of communicating. And that's exactly what we have. American political polarization isn't just a question of disagreement on policies, it's a fundamental epistemological fracture where both camps can't even agree on basic facts. Trump didn't create this fracture alone, but he exploited it, deepened it, and institutionalized it in a way that will make any future national reconciliation almost impossible. Now let's look at the real economy beyond tariffs. The American federal deficit is exploding. We're talking about deficits of $2 trillion per year during full employment, which is economically insane. Trump's massive 2017 tax cuts primarily benefited corporations and the wealthiest, exactly as critics had predicted. The promise was that these cuts would stimulate investment and growth that would compensate for revenue losses. It never happened. Corporations used the money for massive stock buybacks that enriched shareholders, not to raise wages or invest in new factories. The result? A national debt approaching $36 trillion and growing at an unsustainable rate. In the next 10 years, interest payments on this debt will become the largest item in the federal budget, surpassing even defense. And what does Trump do? He proposes even more tax cuts. It's a form of fiscal nihilism that mortgages the future for short-term political gains. Republicans who claim to be the party of fiscal responsibility have completely abandoned this pretense. And Democrats are hardly better with their own massive spending programs. We're witnessing a tacit bipartisan consensus to continue borrowing without limit, betting that markets will continue indefinitely to buy American debt at low rates. It's a bet that has worked well so far, but history suggests that all these bets end badly. And let's talk about what is perhaps the most dangerous thing: the erosion of trust in elections themselves. Since January 6, 2021, Trump and his allies have systematically propagated the lie that the 2020 election was stolen. This is not a legitimate political opinion. It's a demonstrably false lie that has been rejected by more than 60 courts, by judges appointed by Republicans and Democrats, by Republican election officials, by Trump's own attorney general. But 70% of Republicans still believe that Biden was not legitimately elected. Think about what that means. It means that nearly a third of America no longer believes in the legitimacy of the basic democratic process. And when you lose that, you lose the very foundation of what makes a democracy work: the acceptance that the losing side will accept the result and participate loyally in the political system. Trump is now back in power, but the precedent he established remains. A president can refuse to accept the result of an election, can mobilize his supporters against the certification process, can attack the very foundations of electoral democracy, and not only get away without significant legal consequences, but return to power. What does that signal to future candidates? That democratic norms are optional, that the only thing that matters is raw power. Some will say I'm being alarmist, that American institutions are strong enough to resist. Maybe, but let's look at history. Democracies generally don't die with spectacular military coups. They die slowly, through gradual erosion, when norms are violated one by one, when guardrails are circumvented, when populist leaders convince their supporters that the rules don't apply to them. This is exactly what we're observing. Trump is continuously testing the limits of what he can do without consequences. And so far, he's discovering he can do a lot. He can ignore congressional subpoenas. He can pardon his convicted allies. He can use the power of the presidential office for personal gain. He can attack judges, jurors, witnesses. And his party systematically protects him. Why? Because they're afraid of his base. And this fear is rational because Trump has demonstrated that he can destroy the career of any Republican who defies him simply by mobilizing his supporters against them in primaries. He has transformed the GOP into a party of personal loyalty rather than a party of ideas or traditional conservative principles. And that is profoundly anti-democratic. So, is Trump going to destroy the United States? The answer depends on what you mean by destroy. Will he literally make the country disappear? No, of course not. But will he fundamentally transform the character of American democracy in a way that could take generations to repair? That's already underway. Here's what many people don't understand. The real danger of Trump is not Trump himself. Trump is 78 years old. He won't be there forever. The real danger is Trumpism after Trump. It's the normalization of authoritarianism, systematic lying, violation of norms, cynical exploitation of racial and cultural divisions, the rhetoric of political violence. Trump has shown that a politician can succeed in America using this playbook, and there will be others, probably younger, probably more competent, probably more dangerous, who will study what he did and try to reproduce or improve it. Ron DeSantis already tried in Florida with some success. There will be others. And here's the really terrifying thing: the structural problems that created Trump in the first place. Massive inequality, deindustrialization, wage stagnation, the unaffordable cost of housing and education, the collapse of social mobility, the opioid crisis, media polarization, all of this is getting worse, which means the ground is even more fertile for future demagogues than it was in 2016. Democrats think that once Trump is gone, everything will return to normal. That's a fantasy. There's no return to normal because normal is what produced Trump. And unless there are massive structural reforms to address the root causes of the American crisis, Trumpism in one form or another will dominate American politics for a long time. Now, let's be clear about one thing. This doesn't mean the United States is doomed or that all is lost. America has survived a civil war, the Great Depression, segregation, Watergate, Iraq. It has enormous resources, a diversified and innovative economy, institutions that, although weakened, remain stronger than in most countries. But the current trajectory is deeply concerning, and the refusal of a large part of the political and media establishment to really confront the magnitude of the crisis, to be content treating each new Trump transgression as an isolated scandal rather than as a symptom of a systemic disease, only makes things worse. We need brutal honesty about where America is. And this honesty starts with recognizing that Trump is not an aberration, he is a revelation. He reveals the fragility of democratic norms we thought were solid. He reveals the depth of division and resentment in American society. He reveals the failure of both political parties to respond to the real needs of tens of millions of Americans. He reveals that many Americans are willing to trade liberal democracy for a strong man who promises to fight their enemies and restore a mythical greatness. And this revelation is what should really worry us, because it suggests that America's problems are much deeper than any individual, even someone as destructive as Trump. The question, therefore, is not really, will Trump destroy America, but can America save itself from what Trump has revealed about itself? And honestly, right now in January 2025, I don't know anyone who has a confident answer to that question.